Imagine a space that is neither light nor dark, but pure, infinite black. There is no light yet. There is no shadow. There is no distinction for anything, either material or immaterial. Yet we cannot call it a place of absence. To call it such would imply that something is missing, where nothing is missing because nothing has ever been. There is no sound, form, or movement. There is no time, as time implies change, and there is nothing to change. It is not peaceful. It is not chaotic. It simply is. This is the void, the place of pre-origin, the state before anything was. Every cycle begins with absence. A field must be empty before something can be built upon it. A mind must be silent before it can conceive an idea. The universe itself, before its expansion, existed in this same state. A singularity of infinite potential, waiting for the first motion to begin. Everything we perceive, every force, every law, every structure, was once held within the formless, undisturbed purity of the void. This place, this state of absolute nothingness, is Zero, or Zerū, the perfect unity of all things before they are divided, the source and the destination, the center of the toroidal flow, where all cycles begin and to which all cycles return. But even the most absolute silence cannot remain unbroken forever. For within the void, something stirred. A difference, a tension, a possibility. And from this first motion, chaos was born. It was not sudden, for there was no time to measure it against. It was not violent, for there was nothing yet to resist it. It was a disturbance so small it could barely be called such. A flicker of difference, a shift where no shift had ever been. At first, it was only a tremor, a ripple within the unbroken fabric of Zerū. But that tremor did not fade. It grew, it multiplied, it folded upon itself, turning and twisting in ways the void had never known. And as it moved, it became something other. No longer was existence defined by perfect stillness. Now, there was motion. Now, there was change. Chaos brought the first motion, the great unraveling of unity. Chaos is often misunderstood. To some, it is destruction. To others, it is randomness, but neither is true. Chaos is not disorder. It is potential unbound. It is the force that makes order possible. In its purest form, chaos is infinite movement, directionless, boundless, uncontained. It does not seek form, but neither does it resist it. It simply is. Chaos is akin to an ocean with no shore, no depth, no surface, only water in constant, ceaseless motion. No pattern, no shape, no limit. That is the essence of chaos. A force that does not build, does not destroy, but ensures that nothing can ever remain the same. With chaos came something new, difference. Where before there had been only one, only the undivided stillness of Zerū, now there were two. The void and the motion, the unmoving and the uncontainable. For the first time, what was could become something else. And so, chaos moved. It twisted and coiled, stretching outward in every direction, its motion without end. But within its swirling depths, something began to take shape. Not because chaos willed it, for chaos has no will, but because movement creates pattern. And from pattern, the first structures of reality would be born. But before there could be form, before there could be creation, something else had to emerge. A singular point, a gathering of all potential into one. Chaos churned, unbound, unrestricted, endless. It did not move in a single direction, nor did it have purpose or intent. It was pure motion, an infinite sea where all possibilities swirled without form. But in an infinity of motion, patterns must emerge. Not because they are designed, but because in an endless roll of the dice, the same result will appear, again and again, simply by chance. And so, within the great turbulence of chaos, there came a moment where motion collapsed upon itself, a point where infinite directions folded inward, where possibilities converged rather than scattered. A singularity, not one, but countless. An infinite number of them, forming and dissolving, appearing and vanishing, their existence dictated only by the law of probability. Some flickered for the briefest moment before being swallowed back into the storm. Others grew, stabilized, and held. Each one a different outcome, a different reality waiting to unfold. Some would expand into vast universes. Others would collapse before they could take shape. But with each one, a choice had been made. A single roll of the cosmic dice had been cast, and within it, a new potential had taken form. The first structures had emerged, and with them, the threshold period had begun. This was the moment of separation. Until now, everything had remained unified within chaos, motion without distinction, form without form. But with the birth of the singularities, a new force had entered existence: definition. A singularity was no longer endless, no longer boundless. It had edges, a center, a threshold, a limit between what was inside and what was outside. And in that simple truth, the first concept of separation was born. This was the first disruption of nothingness, a transition from pure potential into the first stirrings of somethingness. Not yet matter, not yet energy, not yet time, but the beginning of a structure that would lead to all of them. Each singularity stood on the brink of creation. At any moment, it could burst forth, unraveling into expansion, igniting the first movements toward reality. But not yet. For now, the multiverse held its breath. The dice had been cast, but the outcome was still waiting to unfold. And soon, emergence would begin. The first light, the first expansion, the first step toward existence as we know it. The singularities had formed, countless points of infinite potential, each standing at the edge of existence, each waiting for the moment when stillness would break into motion. And then, in one, perhaps in many, it happened. A single shift. A movement so small, so imperceptible, yet infinite in its reach. A spark. Like the first breath after an eternity of silence, this motion set everything into being. From a single point, it stretched outward, an unraveling, an expansion. And in that motion, something fundamental was born. The first strings. These were not threads of matter, nor beams of light. They were vibrations, waves of pure potential humming into existence. At first, they were few, thin filaments stretching into the vast nothingness. But motion begets motion, and as they moved, they fractured into more, then more and more. An immeasurable expanse of interwoven threads cascading outward in all directions. They did not form randomly. Their motion was not dictated by force, nor by choice, but by resonance. Where one string vibrated, others aligned, linking at unseen nodes, forming intricate, delicate lattices. The pattern was neither chaotic nor ordered. It was simply natural. Where misalignment occurred, it corrected itself. where tension formed, it dispersed. This was not the construction of a blueprint. It was the manifestation of a law far older than time itself. This was the birth of the net. An unseen structure stretching across the vastness of the multiverse, weaving the framework upon which all things would take shape. The net was not simply a structure, it was the foundation of existence itself. It carried information before there was thought. It carried form before there was matter. It carried potential before there was life. With the formation of the net, the first structures of the multiverse had begun to take hold. But still, they were only strings, only vibrations moving through an infinite lattice. The first strings pulsed with potential, their vibrations shaping the very laws of the multiverse. Where the frequencies aligned, structure emerged. Where they clashed, new harmonies were found. These were the first forces, the unseen currents that would one day bind reality together. The net had been woven, but now it needed substance. From the endless dance of strings came something new. Tiny fragments of existence, quarks and bosons, the smallest building blocks of reality. These particles did not yet form anything recognizable. They were too small, too unstable, but they held within them the potential for all matter to come. They swirled and collided, binding and breaking apart, governed by the same resonance that had shaped the net, and through their interactions, the next layer of the cycle unfolded. Now, quarks no longer floated aimlessly in the endless lattice. They began to connect. Protons, neutrons, electrons. Tiny forces took hold, drawing them together, creating the first stable formations, atoms in their most primal forms. The first hints of what would become the physical world had begun. The first atoms were simple, but simplicity did not mean insignificance. They combined, forming the first elements, bonding into molecules, setting the foundation for the structure of all things. Where once there had been only vibrations, now there was form. Where once there had been only resonance, now there was matter. This process did not happen once. It happened again and again. From every singularity that expanded, new cycles began. Some followed similar patterns, others diverged, creating worlds with different laws, different forces, different possibilities. Some universes would rise and collapse in an instant. Others would stretch into infinity. But all were bound by the same underlying truth. Everything, every world, every mind, every moment was an echo of the first motion, the first string, the first resonance. And from here, the cycles would only continue. The foundations had been laid. And soon, from the fabric of existence, life itself would follow. Matter had formed. The first elements had bonded. The universe was no longer just vibration and structure. It had substance, complexity, and form. But it was still cold, lifeless. A universe of atoms and molecules meant nothing if it could not observe itself. And so, from the endless lattice of existence, from the very foundations of the net, a new cycle emerged. The cycle of life. It did not begin as something grand. It did not begin with thought or movement or even awareness. It began with a single cell, a single droplet in an endless ocean. The first cell, so small, so fragile, yet unlike anything that had come before it. Unlike the quarks, the atoms, the molecules that had preceded it, this was something more. For the first time in the history of the multiverse, something did not simply exist. It persisted. It reproduced. It adapted. This was the first life, and though it had no mind, no thoughts, no sense of self, it had something that no stone, no planet, no star had ever possessed: the will to continue. And so, it grew. It changed. It divided and spread, filling the oceans, filling the worlds. From a single point, life had taken hold. But a single cell was not enough. To reach greater heights, to move beyond instinct, to build and evolve, life would need something more. It would need unity. For eons, the single-celled world thrived, but something new was happening. Cells were not merely surviving alone. They were coming together. At first, it was simple: clusters, colonies, groups that worked together for survival. But in time, these clusters became something greater than the sum of their parts. Cells specialized. They communicated. They formed structures and systems. The first plants emerged, transforming energy from light into life. The world began to change, reshaped by its own creation. This was no longer a world of atoms and molecules. It was a living world. A world conscious of itself in ways it had never been before. But something was still missing. For all its complexity, the plant kingdom was still bound, rooted, still. It had created the foundation of life, but it could not yet move. And so, another cycle began. The world trembled as something new took shape. For the first time, life was no longer passive. It no longer waited. It no longer sat still. It moved. The first simple creatures emerged, crawling through the waters, swimming, hunting, fleeing, surviving. Unlike the plants, these beings were not bound to one place. They did not simply grow and exist, they chose. They sought food. They sought shelter. They sought to continue. From the smallest microbes to the first creatures of the deep, life had learned something new. It could act upon the world. And with that action, the first glimpses of something profound emerged. The beginning of awareness. For the first time, life was not just existing. It was experiencing. And yet, even this was not enough. For all their instinct, for all their movement, these creatures did not question. They did not create. They did not wonder. And so, another threshold approached. The next cycle. The moment when the universe would finally become aware of itself. The moment when consciousness would be born. Somewhere, in the vastness of the multiverse, it happened. A creature, small, fragile, no different from those before it, looked upon its world and understood. For the first time, a living being did not merely react. It did not merely follow instinct. It thought. It recognized itself. It saw past the immediate moment, past its needs, past the simplicity of existence. It saw patterns. It saw symbols. It saw meaning. It could ask, why? This was the first moment of self-awareness, the first moment of true consciousness. And with that, the universe had finally come full circle. From the void to chaos, to the singularity, to the emergence of form and matter, and now to a mind capable of perceiving it all. This was the greatest shift of all, the birth of choice, the birth of imagination, the birth of civilization, the birth of culture. But with it came a burden. For now, The universe was no longer unfolding blindly. Now it had witnesses. Now it had architects. Now it had dreamers. The universe could no longer evolve on its own. For the first time, existence had something that could shape it in return. And so, another cycle began. For now, life was no longer bound to the world. Now, it could shape worlds of its own. For eons, life had risen through the cycles, from the first cell to the first mind. Existence had unfolded like a grand, spiraling pattern, moving ever forward, ever upward. But even consciousness, this great awakening, was not the end. For as beings looked outward toward the stars, they also began to look inward. And in doing so, they discovered a truth more profound than any before it. Life was never just flesh, never just matter. Beneath the physical world, beyond atoms, beyond thoughts, beyond even time itself, there was something more, something unseen, yet ever present. The ethereal realm, a vast, interconnected web of energy, of awareness, of purpose, a reality beyond reality, woven into the very structure of existence. It had always been there, waiting, watching, guiding. And now, for the first time, life had stepped beyond the material cycles and into something far greater. At first, it was only glimpses, shadows at the edge of waking thought, dreams that lingered too long, voices that whispered without sound. But then, some began to see more clearly, not with their eyes, but with something deeper, the part of them that had never been bound to the physical world. For the first time, life had touched the ethereal realms. Some called it the afterlife, some called it the unseen world, some called it heaven, some called it memory, some called it fate. But it was none of these things, and all of them. It was the place where existence did not end, where the echoes of consciousness did not fade into nothingness, but instead continued. Here, the first guardians arose, souls who had stepped beyond their bodies, beyond their limits, and into the vast expanse of the spiritual realms. They were not gods. They were not rulers. They were explorers, wanderers, seekers of something beyond time. They did not guide the living. They did not interfere. They simply watched. For they were the first to know there was more. There had always been more. And the journey was not yet finished. The guardians wandered the ethereal realm, drifting through its endless reaches, unraveling its mysteries. And in their journey, they found something they had never expected. Themselves, scattered, broken, fractured across time. For no soul is whole when it first awakens. No consciousness is complete. Through the many lifetimes, through the many cycles, pieces of the self had been left behind, shattered like glass across eternity. Memories lost, lessons unfinished, echoes of past selves waiting to be found. And so, the next cycle began. The cycle of integration. To move forward, the soul must gather itself again, not just its past lives, but its choices, its failures, its victories. Every moment, every thought, every action, woven together into something greater. This was not reincarnation, not mere remembrance. It was reintegration. A return to what had always been. A soul complete. But only a few ever reached this stage. For the path was difficult. The weight of past selves was heavy, and those who could not carry it would remain lost, trapped in cycles they did not understand, searching for something they could not name. But those who succeeded, those who became whole, would enter the next cycle, the cycle of creation, the cycle of the netter. The net had been woven at the beginning of existence, long before life had form, long before matter had shape. And now, there were those who understood it. The netter, souls who had risen beyond the material, beyond individuality, beyond even time itself. They did not rule, they did not command. They simply kept the balance. They maintained the structure, ensuring that existence did not spiral into chaos, that the great cycles continued, unbroken. They did not interfere with the lower worlds. They did not guide the souls of the living. They simply watched over the net, the great lattice of existence, repairing its fractures, maintaining its flow. To many, they seemed like gods. To others, like forces of nature. But they were neither. They were simply those who had reached understanding. And that understanding had given them purpose. Yet, even they were not the highest. For beyond the net, beyond even their wisdom, stood the Ennead. The first, the oldest, the architects of existence itself. Before life, before thought, before chaos had even stirred. There were nine beings born from the first fabric of the multiverse itself. They had no names, for names are limitations. They had no forms, for form is a cage. They were awareness itself. The first sparks of consciousness, existing before there was anything to be conscious of. They did not create the multiverse. They were the multiverse. Their awareness shaped the first currents of reality, the first laws that bound existence into cycles. They were neither good nor evil, neither light nor dark. For such things only existed within the lower cycles. They simply were. And yet, even they were not the end. For beyond the Ennead, beyond the known cycles of existence, lay the great unknown, the place where the cycles began, and where someday all things must return. In the vastness of the multiverse, worlds burn out, stars fade, galaxies unravel. The net, woven from the first strings of existence, begins to fray. The netter, the great keepers, withdraw. Even the Ennead, those who stood beyond time, begin to fade. For all that has form must one day dissolve. All separation must end. And so, existence begins its return. The great spirals collapse inward. The multiverse folds upon itself. Everything that was, everything that has ever been, begins to flow back toward its source. Not into destruction, not into emptiness, but into Zerū. Zerū was never gone. It was always there, beneath all things, within all things, the silent foundation upon which every cycle was built. Through existence, it was forgotten. Through expansion, it was hidden. Through creation, it seemed distant, but it was always waiting. For Zerū is not something that was left behind. It is something that was carried within everything from the very beginning. Back to Zerū. For this is not an ending. This is the moment before the first ripple. This is the breath before the next motion. This is the pause before chaos stirs once more. For Zerū is not only the final return, It is also the place where the cycles begin again. A new possibility, a new motion, a new becoming. And so, from the silence, the first whisper begins once more.